David, so what were your takeaways from Donald Trump's latest contribution?
Well, actually, what we're getting from Trump is his closing argument, as they're putting it. Both sides are saying they're putting out their closing arguments now. And Trump's is basically Kamala Harris broke it. Donald Trump will fix it. So behind him, he had a screen saying Trump will fix it. Perhaps a double meaning could be read into that by those who are mischievous, that he may seek to not only repair America, but perhaps fix the election. Far be it from me to draw that conclusion. But his main line, of course, was that the economy has been broken by this administration, and Harris is responsible, and the border and immigration has been broken by this administration. And actually, he had very powerful backup. On stage with him were two bereaved mothers, one of a young girl who was killed allegedly by two migrants, a 12-year-old girl, and another mother of one of the soldiers who was killed during the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And that was to illustrate the catastrophic pullout under Biden, that he also, of course, blames on Harris as well. And I thought that was very powerful messaging, actually. And there's a video from another mother who'd lost her daughter, killed by illegal immigrants. And that was also a really powerful advertising video. So you can see that the Trump campaign is not pulling any punches at all. It's going full throttle for Kamala Harris on being heartless by allowing so many dangerous migrants through the porous southern border. And remember, record numbers came through the Mexico border last year. And even when they're apprehended, this was the point that Trump was making, even when they're apprehended, a lot of them, most of them are, if they claim asylum, they're simply released into America to await their asylum process, and then they can commit crime in America. So that's a big message on the border. But also, he had another speaker who was running a small business in Florida, who was talking about the pressures of inflation and costs making it hard to do business. So it was really, actually, Trump's got a lot of very strong material, but of course it's surrounded by and always accompanied by a lot of extraordinary and outrageous claims by Trump that take it up to a different level.
Some visceral, characteristically visceral stuff from Donald Trump, though his advisors have been asking him to push hard on the border and on the economy. Now, a lot of conversation since that rally at the weekend where we had those, at the big rally, the racist jokes aimed at Latinos in particular, wondering, speculation about whether that's going to cost the Republican side and Donald Trump votes, maybe some speculation as to whether he'd try to row back. But of course, Donald Trump, David, does not do contrition, does he?
No, not a hint of it, and that's very characteristic of Trump. Of course, he's never one to back down or to admit fault. And this was billed as a press conference that he's just held at Mar-a-Lago, but of course it was actually an hour-long speech from Trump with some other contributors, and there was no questions, and there was no mention of Puerto Rico, which was insulted by a comedian during the Trump event, and nothing, no follow-up at all on that controversy. He simply moved on to these closing arguments that he wants to make on the border and the economy.
Right, DavidCharter, let's talk again soon. Now, back to the US election. We're counting the days down. We're going to be in Pennsylvania on Times Radio Drive next week. It's called the Keystone State. It's often thought of as a smaller, I don't know, representation of the bellwether, the key to the White House. It's got a high share of the 19 electoral votes in the electoral college. They're key to deciding the presidency. And according to the polling guru Nate Silver, the candidate who wins Pennsylvania has more than a 90% chance of winning the White House. Let's talk to the local pollster, Berwin Yost. He's the director of Center for Opinion Research at Franklin and Marshall College. Hello to you. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Well, hi, welcome to the show. I mean, we've got a lot of numbers in so far, the early voting figures. Can we read very much, Berwood, into those numbers?
Well, I mean, historically, in this state, this is only the second time we've had no excuse mail-in balloting. First time being, of course, during the pandemic. So it's really hard to figure out any trends or patterns at this point because there's so few things to talk about in terms of data. I will say that in 2020, most of the votes cast by mail-in ballot were from Democrats. It seems likely that that's going to happen again, although Republicans have made some efforts to encourage mail-in balloting among their voters. But I would say this, the majority of requests for mail-in ballots have come again from Democrats, and the majority of those completed have come again from Democrats. But that was true in 2020 as well.
Are there any indications from, say, the number of women as opposed to men who voted? Do we have that kind of data?
No, we don't have that data at this point. Everything we're talking about now is relying on the polling data that we see. And we expect there to be tremendous gaps between the preferences of female voters and of men. By large margins, women in the state and the country favor the Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris. Men seem to be heading in the direction of Donald Trump. And we'll see if that pattern continues and if it's of a historic size.
Okay, now talk to me a bit about how far the opinion polls, and there've been many of them, tell anything like the full story. What are the wild cards in this game? I'm thinking, for example, of maybe a greater turnout among women or shy Trump voters, shy Democrats for that matter. What about those factors that may be hard to detect?
Yeah, look, in a race that's essentially a toss-up, our last poll showed that among likely voters, it was 49.6 to 49.3. Every group could matter. I think you've put your finger on what's most important, though, and that is which candidate is best able to get their voters to the polls. In our last poll, there seemed to be some lagging among younger voters under 35, among moderate voters. Those voters tended to favor Kamala Harris. And if they don't show up, then this is going to be an advantage for really the Trump campaign. And the major cleavage in this state, and I would argue in many places in the United States, has to do with education and class. Basically, college-educated voters have very different preferences, particularly from white working class voters. One of the real stories of this election is the way working class voters of all races seem to be moving towards Republicans. And that's really, I guess, if I put my finger on one thing that's a wild card, it's what ultimately drives the decision that a voter is making. Is their decision going to come down to their concerns about the economy, which are substantial, or is something else going to come into play, like women's rights and abortions or concerns about democracy? I think the voters that will decide this race will be determined on where they come down on those two issues, and we don't have an answer to that.
All right, Berwood Yost, thank you so much for joining us. Now, meanwhile, both campaigns are targeting the voters of Pennsylvania, the key to the White House, it's often described as. And among those batting for Kamala Harris is the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats in Scotland. It's Alex Cole-Hamilton. Hello to you, Alec.
Hi, John.
So tell me, what did you do for the Harris campaign in Pennsylvania?
Well, I booked tickets, paid for flights myself, and went to stay with my sister, who lives an hour north of Scranton, Pennsylvania, that key swing state, as we've been hearing. And basically, I knocked about 1,000 doors for the best part of a week for the Democratic precinct office in Scranton, one of 300 offices across the state for the Democrats, in their massive ground game that they have now to answer the call from the pollster we've just heard from of getting the vote to the polls.
Right. What do they make on the American Pennsylvanian doorsteps of a canvasser or a door knocker like you with a British accent, a foreigner turning up?
It didn't actually come up that often, you'd be surprised to hear. This isn't my first rodeo. I went to help Obama on similar terms in 2008 in Virginia. And when it does feature, it's out of amusement and interest rather than any kind of anger or disappointment. And it was a useful conversation starter, because when people clearly heard that I wasn't American, they wanted to know why I was motivated to come here. And I think they were surprised to hear that the American election is being watched not just internally, but by every country of the world, and everyone has a stake in it, because a second Trump presidency will be felt not just by minority groups in America, LGBT plus community, the women, and the impact on women's rights that we've already seen.
Yeah.
It'll be felt by the fighting men and women of Ukraine, about our NATO alliance, and I think this is, as you've said in your trail, perhaps the most consequential election of our lifetimes.
Did they mainly use you, Alec, when it comes to knocking on Democrats' doors? And did the subject come up with you being a liberal Democrat? Because among a lot of Republicans, being a liberal is a bit of a dirty word.
It was really refreshing. I didn't reveal who I was at all. I was Alex, a volunteer for Kamala Harris for president, and that was it. We didn't get into that. But yeah, no, we're in that phase of the campaign where this is all about turnout. It's all about getting the vote out. So the doors, in large part, were registered Democrats, independents, or about people whom they had no data. In a lot of cases, a lot of the doors had been knocked on several times already. Such is the volume of activist presence in the state. I saw activists coming from Rhode Island, from Michigan, from Massachusetts, lots of different places helping out in this key swing state, because they know all eyes, because of the slightly quirky American electoral system, all eyes are on the states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, some in the South as well, because they will decide this election. That's why I chose to go there.
Okay, now bearing in mind, Alec, there's no point in any campaign spin here. Did you come away with any kind of sense of what's going to happen?
It's really tight. It's really tight. I think I left on a high. I think I left with a sense of momentum. But everybody in the campaign office is knackered. They are driving towards the finish line, but they're taking nothing for granted. This is going to go down to the wire. I'm an eternal optimist, John. I'm a Liberal Democrat. That's one of the reasons I'm in this job. It's one of the reasons I got elected, because I kept believing that we could make a difference, that we could change the election results. And there was nothing about that experience that told me she couldn't win. I think it's all going to come down to turnout.
Okay, we, as they say, we'll see. Alec Cole-Hamilton, lovely to talk to you. Thank you.